This story is very interesting. It highlights the consequences of what a war veteran can experience and live. It all starts at a US base where we meet Captain Sam Cahill, who on that day, October 7, 2007, is 4 days away from joining the US forces in Afghanistan. So he writes a farewell letter to his wife Grace with orders to deliver it only if he dies in combat. At the end of the day, he returns home where he is reunited with Grace and his daughters, Maggie and the eldest, Isabel. The latter receives her half-heartedly, knowing she will soon be gone. But like any father, Sam knows how to change his daughter's mood with a few games. The happy moment is interrupted, however, as Sam must pick up his brother named Tommy, who has just been released from prison after an attempted armed murder. On the way home, Sam asks him if he didn't think to apologize to the woman who put him in prison, but Tommy ignores the question. He asks and says goodbye as he enters the city, promising to see each other again soon. So, after cashing the check the state gave him, Tommy rents a room in a motel where workers usually stay to save money, which leads to not even having hot water. That night, the family gathers to say goodbye to Sam. Here we meet his stepmother, Elsie, who helps with the meal, while his father, Hank, plays with the children. Soon, Tommy arrives at the gathering and is greeted by his niece Maggie, who upon seeing him bluntly mentions that Grace doesn't like him. Wasting no time, Tommy seizes the opportunity and gives her the flowers he brought to his sister-in-law. Once inside, we see that Tommy is greeted with clear love from his mother and Sam, but Hank simply greets them. In the middle of dinner, when Tommy finds out that Sam is leaving next Tuesday, he questions who the bad guys are in that war. At this, Hank intervenes to make it clear to him that Sam is a hero who is serving his country. Later, when Maggie asks her father if he will return for her birthday, Isabel mentions that her friend's father was unable to return for his daughter's birthday because he was in prison. This allows Hank to say that all families have similar problems, and when Tommy agrees that he is right, his father takes it as a provocation and challenges him to try to imitate his brother. Tommy tries to ignore him, but Hank continues and asks him if he thinks the food now is better than the food in prison. Tommy explodes, but Sam manages to calm him down, and for his part, Hank decides to leave, ruining the evening. Past this, after dismissing Tommy, asking him not to cause any more trouble, we see Sam continue the night by parting with his wedding ring, for Grace to keep until he returns. Meanwhile, while Tommy enjoys his solitude in a bar, Sam enjoys acclaiming his wife, though perhaps for the last time, with such skill that she says she is willing to accompany him to Afghanistan. Thus, on October 12, Sam arrives in Afghanistan, meeting his men to return to work, from where he sends videos of his day to Grace, who goes on with her life in her job as a master gardener. One day when Sam and his team are being transported by helicopter and everything seems normal, they are hit by an enemy missile, and although there is a chance that the pilot manages to land, they are immediately hit a second time. Shortly thereafter, two high-ranking military officers visit Grace at her home, who realizes that they are there to inform her that her husband is dead. This causes Grace to spend the whole night watching the videos where Sam was still with them and listening to his pre-recorded message box. At that moment, Tommy arrives on the scene with the intention of taking Sam's car that he had lent her, as he is unaware of her death. His footsteps alert Grace, who, after listening to him talk non-stop, bursts into tears revealing that her brother is dead. Grace asks him to come in, but Tommy is furious at the news and that no one told him anything until now. Grace swears they tried, but he wouldn't respond. That said, Tommy blames her for letting Sam go, as her tears are now useless. We then see that he arrives at his parents, where he spends several hours outside, making the cold hit him as a kind of self-inflicted punishment, and only when NC asks him to come inside does Tommy accept and returns to see his father, who invites him to have a blue label of Johnny Walker to drown his sorrows, though Tommy declines. The next day, when Grace checks to see if her daughters are ready for the funeral, she notices that Isabella is in rebellion, as she doesn't want to wear her black dress to the wake. Grace agrees to let them come as they wish, and so they attend the church, where they sing Glory to God along with her family and Sam's military friends. When this is over, Grace receives the letter Sam wrote to her before he left. Meanwhile, seeing that Hank was living all day, Tommy asks her for the keys to drive, but her father takes it as an offense and reprimands her, advising her to get a job and earn enough money to buy her own car. But Tommy keeps insisting, so Hank asks him if when he dies, good people like the military will also come to his brother's friends at his funeral. At this, Tommy decides to respond and insinuates to his father that he is also to blame for his death, as he was the one who pushed him to be a sailor, and reminds her that Hank yelled at his mother every night before she died. The situation calms down only when Elsie intervenes and Hank decides to walk away. Later we see that Grace still doesn't have the courage to open the letter, and at the same time in Afghanistan we discover that Sam, under strange circumstances, was still alive with Private Joe Willis. Both survived but find themselves imprisoned by a group of terrorists who lock them in a makeshift basement. From here, when Sam observes Joe cautiously contemplating the photos of his family that passed through the hands of the terrorists, he orders him that from now on he must deny any family ties and promise that he only knows him. Meanwhile, Grace's quiet night changes when Tommy calls her to ask for help, as he is in trouble for not having the money to pay for his drinks, and if he doesn't, he will get into bigger trouble and lose his life. Probation. Grace takes pity, so she arrives at the bar and pays the $47 tab, and since Tommy has nowhere to go, she takes him home. The next day, Tommy is awakened by the sound of Maggie cooking breakfast with Isabel to surprise his mother. Moments later, Hank arrives on the scene to drop supplies in his son's refrigerator, supposedly dead. Seeing Tommy there, he decides to apologize to him for the argument the other day. Tommy accepts that Sam was always smarter than him, and his father points out that more than intelligence, Sam was very athletic, and that while Tommy was also talented, his mistake was giving up too soon when he tried something. In the midst of this, Hank's words turn to tears as he remembers his son, but he pulls himself together at the mention that they should remodel Grace's kitchen. When Grace returns home, she finds Tommy with an army of his friends as workmen in the middle of renovations. Grace was unaware, so she demands explanations from them, but realizing it's a noble gesture, she allows them to continue. Speaking of Sam, that morning he manages to see that a helicopter from the army of the is flying over the area, which means they are being searched for. They try to create an opening to escape, but make too much noise and are discovered. Joe begins to feel the weight of having spent 2 months as a prisoner, and knowing that American soldiers are always executed. He berates Sam for saving them, claiming they would be better off dead. Sam keeps calm by reminding her to deny any family relationship, but later the monotony ends when they notice that other terrorists have just arrived, who after arguing with the one who imprisoned them, approach them to release them from their cell in exchange for a few dollars. They are taken to a terrorist camp, where they are received by the Taliban leader of that army. Here, while everything is being recorded, we see that the Taliban first attends to one of his men who was found using the satellite phone. He begs for mercy, claiming that he only called his pregnant wife. However, the Taliban will not forgive him for jeopardizing his position, so he executes him without hesitation before the eyes of the Americans and the child soldiers of his own country. Ex-army. Joe averts his eyes, but Sam stares at him. Then the Taliban orders them to proclaim on camera that Afghanistan is the Taliban's country, and the US has no right to set foot on their land, and if the soldiers do not obey, they will be tortured. Sam refuses, and so is taken to solitary confinement. Meanwhile, as he does every morning, Tommy arrives at the house to continue remodeling the kitchen, but that day, unlike before, Grace watches tenderly as her daughters play with their uncle and forget their father's death. In the midst of this, a misstep by Maggie causes her to end up spilling paint on one of the workers. Then, while the rest laugh at him, Grace decides to make it up to him by finding him some clothes. But as she arrives at Sam's closet, her feelings well up as she remembers that he is no more. Days later, Sam is brought before the Taliban leader, who asks him if he wants to help Joe and talk. And we see how he begins the torture against his partner, stabbing him with a red-hot knife. The brutality of the act is such that Joe ends up accepting it, trying to talk and express on camera that, as an American soldier, he understands that Afghanistan belongs to its people, in search of their freedom. Joe reveals to the Taliban that Sam has a wife and 2 daughters. On the other side of the world, when Grace returns from work, she finds the trail of drawings with signs that her daughters left behind, and following it, they arrive at her remodeled kitchen, where her friends and family surprise her with a surprise birthday party hosted by Tommy. Past this, Grace and Tommy take the girls to the ice rink. On the way, when Maggie walks away, Isabel tells her uncle that everyone loves her sister because she is nice. Tommy understands that she is jealous, so he tells her that in her childhood Sam saved them when she fell in the river, and that not only is she just like her father, but everyone loves her just like Sam. Back at the track, Grace happily watches as her daughters have fun playing with their uncle without thinking about the past. Then Tommy decides to follow Sam's advice and waits for the woman who sued him until she passes him, and although he hesitates at first, we see her approach to apologize to her. as he now only talks to Grace. He later tells her that the woman revealed to him that she continues to have those nightmares where he comes back and shoots her, and when he swore to her that he would never hurt her again. The woman started crying and later thanked him, as she felt free after a long time. That said, Tommy passes on the subject, and while lighting some magic herbs, he mentions that the song in the background he used to listen to in his youth. Grace says she shares his taste, but Tommy thinks she's more into classical music. Grace then proves him just the opposite, inhaling some green smoke and drinking beers like a bricklayer. Here they begin to reminisce about their high school days, and when Tommy claims that Grace was too stuck up, she makes it clear that she just didn't like him, because he was always fighting and drinking. However, in the midst of such disqualifications, the sexual tension climaxes, causing them to start kissing. But this is short-lived, for they soon remember that they are brothers-in-law, and as Grace comes up for air, he can't bear the guilt and cries at the memory of their relationship to her brother and then leaves the house. On her side, after several months, Grace thinks again about opening the letter that Sam left her, but ends up putting it off. Meanwhile, Sam's psychological torture continues, as he is forced to watch his comrade being burned with the iron burning all night long, and when dawn breaks, Sam is taken to the center of the camp where the Taliban leader hands him a metal pipe, ordering him to kill Joe, as he is no longer considered of value. Seeing the terror of his comrade, and that it seems that none of them will get out of there alive, Sam throws the tube as a sign of disobedience. However, the Taliban leader acts immediately and offers him his freedom to see his family again if he carries out his orders, warning him that if he does not, his head will be cut off. Out of options, Sam wields the pipe as they scream around him and a gun is pointed at his head, until the pressure gets the better of him and he proceeds to relentlessly bash Joe's skull in, wrapped in a murderous frenzy that only seeks to survive. And when it's over, we learn that the sin of his actions prevents him from sleeping in his solitary cell. The next day, Tommy returns to Grace's house to finish the last details of the kitchen, and once there, he takes the opportunity to promise her that he doesn't want to ruin the family relationship they have, since he only wants her permission to visit his nieces. Grace replies that she has no problem with him, and that if he behaves strangely, it is because he misses Sam. On his side, that day the Taliban camp wakes up more agitated than usual, as we see their leader speeding away with his trusted men, as they have just been discovered by the Americans. One of the guards tries to kill Sam, but he takes cover in time for his jailer to be executed. Immediately, when the fire ceases, we see that the American soldiers proceed to search the place, and in doing so, they ignore the camera that recorded the statements, torture and murder of Joe, which was destroyed by the fire at the hands of a child soldier. Thus, upon surfacing, Sam is discovered by his compatriots, although he is still unable to speak. Soon after, while Tommy arrives with Maggie and Isabel, Grace receives the call from the army, informing him that Sam is alive. Days go by, and families gather at the airport to welcome Sam, who still has the 1,000-yard stare, a look with traumatic undertones, even as he embraces his daughters, his brother, or his parents. However, what happened makes Tommy reflect on his life, because now he understands that what they are building with Grace and his nieces no longer has a future. Back at home, his daughter shows Sam the new kitchen. Sam is not very surprised, and then, without saying much, he makes them all lie down next to him to hug them, while his mind continues to be lost in his thoughts. Later, we see that Sam is at ease in solitude as he shaves, as Grace's eruption instinctively puts him on alert. Here, observing his burn scars, Grace shows him that she still desires him by kissing his body, but Sam asks for time to finish shaving. When Hank visits his son, he notices that he has changed, and as he apparently knows what he went through, he proceeds to tell him that when he returned from Vietnam, he was unable to talk to his mother, and yet he is still now knows he was wrong about how to guide him and Tommy, so make it clear that if he wants to talk, just give him a call. Sam's condition prevents him from playing with his daughters, and so when the family goes to the ice rink, he stands motionless watching his family, including Grace, have fun with Tommy. In the midst of this, when his brother sits down next to him to rest, Tommy mentions to him that he looks good next to Grace and his daughters, and thanks him for taking care of them, as he didn't expect it coming from him. Tommy tells him that helping comes naturally to him, and that the experience makes him think about starting a family. Upon hearing this, Sam mentions that Grace is a wonderful woman, only to then bluntly ask him if he slept with her. Tommy thinks he's joking, but Sam assures him that if it had happened, he would understand, since he was officially dead. Tommy asks him to stop thinking about it, and though Sam promises he could forgive him, since seeing him together, Tommy and Grace look like teenagers in love, and he knows he slept at her house, so he's obligated to tell her the truth. Still, Tommy refuses to answer because he considers the question makes no sense. Back at her house, Sam is left motionless as Cass and Willis, along with their son, decide to visit them. She tells Grace that she often has nightmares where Joe looks for her and tries to tell her something, but as she speaks, her teeth fall out of her mouth. And the last time she dreamed it, Sam was there staring at her with a smile, and for that instant she hated him for coming back alive. And that was why he is there, as guilt over his feelings of hatred force him to apologize to Sam and her. In the midst of this, when Cassie confronts Sam for the first time, she asks him if he saw or heard Joe die, but Sam assures her that he was not present, so Cassie leaves, telling her son that Sam was his father's friend and a good man. As night falls, Sam's insomnia causes him to distract himself by rearranging the glasses in his glass cabinet, lining them up perfectly, and at the slightest noise he draws his gun in alert mode as he searches his house, and it's all seen by Grace, who prefers to stay out of the way. The next day, Sam adopts his report and reports back to the base to the major, Cavazos, to ask him to send him back to Afghanistan as he claims he is ready and needs to see his men. However, when Cavazos asks him about his family, Sam reveals that he could not stay with them because they do not understand him. Cavazos then refuses his request, claiming that he needs time to fully recover. Back at home, at dinner time, Sam continues to show his instability when Maggie compares an elephant to a dog just because it has big ears, as Sam demands to know why that is funny to her. Grace asks him to calm down, which causes Sam to get angry and leave the table. Isabel immediately asks her father if he is alright, but she is more interested in knowing when her Uncle Tommy is coming. That said, Grace approaches Sam and asks him to tell her what happened to him or what was done to him while he was a prisoner. But Sam interrupts her questionnaire to demand to know what happened between Tommy and her. Not wanting to lie to him, Grace swears to him that they only kissed. But the important thing is for him to know that she missed him so much for thinking he was dead, that he couldn't get out of bed. He goes on and asks her to tell him the source of her ills, but Sam maintains his position and tells her that he believes she slept with his brother, and seeing that she continues to deny it, Sam decides to leave. Thus we see that he goes as far as the cemetery to visit Joe's grave, and there he remains until dawn, for only then does his mind regain enough peace to return home. Here, seeing that Isabel is somehow afraid of him, Sam proposes that now everything will be alright, as he was just confused. He then approaches Grace, and to reassure her he explains that he went out to think about his family and came to the conclusion that he is very lucky to be alive with them. Thus, his family regains peace and reunites at Maggie's birthday party, where Tommy attends with a new partner named Tina, which Isabel doesn't seem to like, as she simply ignores him upon greeting him. Tommy introduces Tina as an old friend, but they are quick to clarify that they have only known each other for an hour. The night continues as normal with several laughs at Maggie's witticisms, but the tension begins to escalate when Tina mentions that no one, even the Marines, are prepared to see someone die. But it escalates even more when, for no reason, Isabel tries to take Maggie's birthday presents from her, despite her father's warnings. Isabel then berates them all that Maggie owns everything she wants, and that this was not the case even on her birthday, as her father was away on a trip. However, the adults ignore her because they don't know what to say to her, so Isabel proceeds to squeeze a balloon as a sign of anger, and when Sam can't take it anymore, he takes the balloon away from her. In tears, Isabel berates him for not dying in Afghanistan, as she knows he is angry that Grace would rather sleep with Uncle Tommy. She even claims that her mother and uncle have sex all the time behind her back. The table falls silent, as no adult knows what to say, and it must be Maggie who speaks, asking to go to sleep. On the way home, the silence in Sam's family continues, and only his eyes can be seen full of anger at the wheel. At home, before going to sleep, Isabel apologizes to her mother. Grace asks her why she lied knowing the truth. Then her two daughters explain to her that they don't feel comfortable around their father, preferring their uncle. After promising them that their father will be fine and seeing Sam wandering in his yard under the snow, Grace calls Elsie to warn her that she doesn't know what Sam is capable of in that state. At this, Tommy disobeys his father and decides to go to his brother's house to prevent a catastrophe. When Sam finally enters, he asks Grace about his daughters, and realizing that they are already asleep, he changes the subject. As she pushes herself, a crowbar asks her directly what she should do now with everything she knows. As he knows Tommy removed the kitchen, once there, he reprimands Grace if she has any idea what he had to do to get back to her. Grace replies that she doesn't, so Sam proceeds to break all the stuff. He destroys the vines while claiming that he has no idea of the acts he committed and suffered, only to end up going back to a woman of his stray animal ilk. And now that he's there, he discovers that he slept with his brother in his own house where he sleeps in his daughter's. Grace begs him to stop, promising him it's not true, but Sam continues and asks him if he has any idea how much he loves her and what his hands are capable of for her. Sam's anger gets the better of him, leading him to destroy every trace of his brother in the house, as he continues to accuse her of being a random bitch. Just then Tommy arrives, and without thinking, she throws herself at him to hug him. However, as Grace walks away, Sam hears a noise and her traumas awaken, making her alert, and she wields her gun against Tommy while reprimanding him for his betrayal. But Tommy is saved, as at that moment the police arrive, so Sam goes out to greet them carrying his gun as if nothing, asking them if they have a problem against him. Tommy comes out to stop the police from killing his brother. Even Sam makes it clear to them that he is no war hero, even shooting in the air to dare them to shoot him. Tommy convinces the police to give him time to talk to his brother, but then Sam decides to put a gun to his own head, while all the voices go through his mind, and only when Tommy reminds him that his family, and he comes to his senses and tells his brother that he feels like he is drowning, and the police manage to arrest him. After this, while Sam remains in the rehabilitation center, Grace decides to open the letter where he assures her that the only thing he knows for sure is that he loves her. That night, Sam calls Tommy to remind him that their bond is unbreakable, as he is her brother. The next day, while Tommy is taking care of his nieces, Grace visits Sam for the first time after the event. Here she again asks him to tell her what happened, that he is punishing himself. Sam keeps silent, but when Grace warns him that if he doesn't tell her what happened he won't see her again, in tears he decides to reveal to her that he killed Joe Willis, thus ending this very real story of a war veteran who lives the consequences of experiencing traumatic events.